All right, everybody, welcome back. I am thrilled to be having this conversation because we can never get enough of the topic around standing out from the crowd. As you know, someone who is a hardcore introvert, as I would say, I would classify myself as a hardcore introvert, highly sensitive person, and an empath. I know that it's been a struggle for me, even though it doesn't seem like it, to really, put myself out there and do all of those extroverting things. So I'm really excited to have this convo today. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. And as someone who identifies as all three of those things, hardcore introvert, empath, sensitive, all of the stuff, this is going to be a good conversation.
Yeah. So let's actually just start there. So tell us a little bit about how you got into PR. You have podcasts. And then I would actually, given that you identify that way also, I want to dive into that a little bit too and how you put yourself out there, because I think that would be helpful. But how did you get into this line of work?
So this really started 4 years ago when I lived next to, stay with me, this is so random. I lived next to a wholesale produce store, which sold all of the produce and vegetables to restaurants in San Diego. It was also open to the public. And so as a neighbor, I got 20% off. So I bought a lot of my groceries there and I became quite friendly with everybody that worked there, etc. And one day as I was walking through the hallway to get to the big warehouse, I noticed that there was a podcasting studio being built. And I asked what was going on, and they said they wanted to really get into being more of a media company around produce, and they were going to produce some podcasts. And so I asked if I could hop on the mic and be one of their shows. They said yes. And so I started podcasting in a produce wholesale store, which is super weird. And I really just had women on, local women who were doing things that I really believed in. I talked a lot about mental health and spirituality since I live with bipolar disorder. And a year into that, it became somewhat stale. And I think the takeaway here is that since I wasn't doing it all myself, since I had a producer, etc., I didn't throw myself into it so significantly. And so I was at the pool with my sister. We had just gotten massages. We were drinking rosé. It was her birthday. And I didn't have an episode for the following week because that's how organized I was. And I asked her if she would come on the podcast. And we recorded on my phone in the business center of this hotel. We ate truffle chips the entire time. We did not talk about mental health or spirituality. We talked about The Bachelor, and I had the best time of my fucking life. There was something about putting me and my sister together, locked in a room with just a mic and concentrated energy with a specific topic that just lit me up. And so 2 weeks later, I couldn't shake it. I couldn't stop thinking about this energy, and I thought we really needed to do something. So we started OK Sis podcast. And very quickly, 5 months into OK Sis podcast, we were interviewing some of our girl crushes, people we never thought we would have the opportunity to talk to. And I really saw that when we had a guest on, our community, which was so much smaller back then, and I say this because even with that small of a community at that level we were at, the impact was still great. They would follow our guests on Instagram. They would buy their product. They would sign up for their newsletters. They would invest in coaching with them. And, come February 2019, I was in a state in my life where I was not currently my own boss. I was working for my mom, and I had been entrepreneurial in my early 20s. And getting back to running my own thing was my goal in business. I wanted to own my own business. And so I just, when I say it now, it sounds very thought out and it sounds very inspirational and revolutionary, etc. But truly in that moment, it was like, how do I be my own boss? And how do I start something that I could be seen as a credible expert in because of experience? And since I was fresh into the podcast and saw the power, I said, you know what? Let's just run in this medium. I love it. I'm having the time of my life. I'm seeing powerful conversations happening. I'm seeing powerful connections and networking happening. So I started Scouts Agency. I had a media kit made up from a graphic designer. I had a list of 1,000 female podcasters because I decided that I would first go after female podcasters since I was a podcaster myself. I thought it would make them trust me more. And I came up with three services. The first was booking high profile guests on your podcast if you have one, because my sister and I were able to book insane guests, 3 months into the game. The second was booking them as a guest on podcast because I recognize that beautiful, beautiful power of being a guest. And the third, to be honest, I put traditional PR because I didn't think anyone would sign with me if I didn't say I did that. I don't come from an agency. I have zero traditional PR experience. We'll see how it goes. Well, people signed with me very quickly. And 4 months later, I quit my day job. 6 months later, I had a roster of 10 and hired my first employee. And we really became known as the agency that runs really successful high profile podcast tours for women. We've done this for Rebecca Minkoff, Kat Sadler, Jessica Zweig, Vanessa Rossetto, Damona Hoffman, Kelly Baker. It goes on. And, the traditional PR stuff popped off too. We've had our clients in every single publication from Vogue to InStyle, Marie Claire, Refinery 29, BuzzFeed, all of that. But really what started this business was just this inkling of like, hey, I want to be my own boss again. And what am I super passionate about right now? And then I ran with it.
Yeah. And I love that it all started from something, seemingly insignificant maybe at the time.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
Like something we're like, let's just do this. And it was like almost like I love when that happens because I think that is such a beautiful, I know the word authentic is thrown around and it's slightly nauseating at this point. But that is like the purest of pure. Like when you were telling that story, I was like, that moment is like the purest moment that created something for you, that of course it happened that way, because if it was forced or contrived or anything like that, you might not have sort of felt that vibe and felt that energy. But because it was just so seemingly insignificant, it was just fun, it was pure, it was light, that you were like, oh, I like this, let's do more of that. And it just turned into what it turned into.
And I think that's a really good point, because I think that, my sister struggled with this for years. She was like, I want to run my own business, I want to be an entrepreneur, but I don't know what my idea is. And so being an entrepreneur and running your own business isn't just creating what seems easiest or just getting an idea and doing it. It's really about allowing timing to work out in your life and to just continuously say yes to things that you're curious about and that pull your energy forward. And eventually it tumbleweeds into something that is perfect for you.
I want to ask you something because this just popped into my head, so I'm going to go with it. I've never had this conversation before. You said before that you were an introvert and you do PR.
Yes.
So how does that work? Because I know for me, I'm a hardcore introvert too, and I put myself out there. I joke, I play the role of an extrovert on the internet, but this isn't the stuff that drains me. Like, this is not the stuff that drains me. And so I think people have a misconception. They're like, oh, I'm an introvert, I can't do social media. Oh, I'm an introvert, I can't podcast. Oh, I'm an introvert. I'm like, oh, it's not how this works.
No, you're an introvert, so podcasting and social media is your only option, because you're sure as hell not going to a networking event with 300 people.
Right.
So, literally, if you are an introvert, this shit is made for you. I can talk to you all day long and feel great. If there were 10 of us in this Zoom meeting, oh, forget it. You and I have to take a nap afterwards. We're exhausted. Right. So if you're an introvert and you think putting yourself out there is scary, I actually don't think. There's two things that you're combining. Putting yourself out there has nothing to do with being an introvert. Fear of putting yourself out there is an insecurity, and introvert is the excuse, because in fact, being a guest on a podcast is how introverts rise. Having one-on-one conversations with nobody else in the room is actually
meaningful, meaningful, energy giving.
Yes.
That's what I mean. It's like, and I think people do use it as an excuse, and I'm like, no, you don't understand. Like, you're right. Like, this is the best medium. Even group coaching, for example, for me, like speaking in a group versus speaking one-to-one is more energy giving. Like, because the energy that feeds. And it's so interesting how people maybe misunderstand, where they're like, oh, I can't do a Facebook Live, I'm an introvert. And you're right, that's an insecurity about, looking unprofessional. It has nothing to do with being an introvert. Like, I'm an introvert. I don't talk to humans outside of my house if I can help it. And, and I could do this all day long. This is energy giving to me because it's meaningful and it matters and it's in my zone of genius and I love it and it's my jam all day long.
Yeah. So, introverts, they get their energy from one-on-one connection and from being alone. Extroverts get their energy from being in big groups of people. So if you're an introvert, being a podcast guest or being a podcast host is kind of made for you, and it's the smarter way to network. You can go into a conference of 300 people and come out with a couple maybe good connections that might propel you forward. If you have your own podcast, you can invite your role models, people you admire, the authors that you just totally worship. Maybe it takes a little bit of time to get some of those major players, but in no other world can you have a deep, meaningful one-on-one conversation with somebody that you admire and have it not drain your energy by having to drive to a studio or drive to a conference or go to an event, and it fills you up with energy and increases your network in your career. It's my sister and I call it the biggest scam. Like, someone's going to figure out that podcasting is a scam because it's just so powerful.
Right. And it's interesting because I would add even PR into that, because think of, you get one magazine or you get a connection or you get like featured somewhere, and that could equal the growth and the notoriety of you standing on a stage and having to speak and then talk to hundreds and hundreds of people, which I guess depending on where you live still may or may not be happening. But, PR is also a good thing for introverts too.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about traditional PR and digital media, it's mostly done over email or a phone call with one person. And so most of the times I'm sending my clients questions to answer. And so in there, you can take away the performance anxiety, the insecurities about how you sound, because you have moments to marinate on what your message is. So traditional PR is even better for introverts because you can hide behind a screen even more so. So putting yourself out there, I don't believe has anything really to do with introverts versus extroverts. I think that's a narrative that we attach to it to keep ourselves from using our voice.
Yeah. So when you were building this, I'm so curious, and given the fact that you had no, media background, no communications background, what were some of the, triggers or vulnerabilities or beliefs that you had to work through in order to get to where you are?
I think the biggest challenge, for me, I've always been someone that doesn't think that I have to go through all these hoops to work or be successful at something. I remember I'm a college dropout twice. I dropped out twice. The first was because of my bipolar diagnosis. The second was because I got a job offer. And I remember getting an internship to a PR agency, actually, and me telling them I had a semester and a half left. And I said, would you hire me if I quit? If I dropped out right now, like, can I get a full-time offer from you? And they said, no, you have to finish college. And I said, I don't understand. My next semester, I'm reading British literature from the 17th century. Like, there's nothing I'm going to learn in the next month and a half that's going to prepare me for this. And so I always consciously kind of knew that the steps in which society makes us take aren't necessarily the most rational, nor are they the most beneficial towards your end goal. And so when I started this agency, I said, okay, well, traditional PR is finding a journalist email and emailing them a pitch. I am first a writer. That's been my first passion ever since I learned how to write. And so PR for me is the ability to craft a beautiful brand narrative. I implement a lot of creative writing into my pitches, a lot of warmth, a lot of human connection and emotion. I am very descriptive with my prose, I would call it, in my PR pitches. And so for me, it's just an option it's just an opportunity to connect to people who can mutually benefit the other. And so how do I do that? I get to tell a beautiful story and narrative about my client. I get to brag about her as much as I can because she probably wouldn't brag about herself. And I get to provide inspiration to a writer who then emails me back. knowing that I had no connections or resources or software available for me into the industry, I did what I had to do, which was email hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of writers, scrolling on Twitter constantly trying to find emails in the beginning until now I, have a subscription decision. But, if the alternative route would have been to graduate college and work my way up in an agency for 5 to 7 years before having the confidence to do it on my own. Or I could just be really fucking uncomfortable for 1 year and figure it out myself. And that one, while probably more painful, my impatient nature took over and I decided to do that route instead.
I love that you just said that. I'm going to make that a clip actually, because I feel like that right there is just the epitome of, how people get to be where they are versus not, right? It's this thing of, well, I have to go the traditional route because this is what they say. And, I have to work my way up. Or you're like, I could Google and figure it out.
Like, I'm not walking into an emergency room and being like, let me try surgery. You know what I mean? We have to understand that there's so many roles in this world other than lawyer, doctor, dentist, healthcare, etc., that are so much more fluid and available to us than we believe them to be. People are so mystified by PR. Let me break it down for you. You write a good pitch, you find an email, you send it. That's it. Right. And so what's in my control? The pitch letter. And so I'm going to write that in a beautiful, compelling, interesting way. And that's fun for me. That's really creative for me.
Yeah, I get that for sure. Because I also too, like if somebody was to say to me, what do you actually do? I use words to move people. That's what I do. Definitely. Like, that's what I do. For people who are, wondering about PR and how to go about getting it and what they need, I think one of the biggest misconceptions is I'm just starting. I can't get PR, or how do I get PR, or do I really need it? Can we just talk a little bit like specifically about, what it is and how to ready yourself to get it, how to make it look like, all of those things.
Yeah. So I represented, I spewed out the more high profile, more established clients of mine. I've also represented women from the ground zero, from having 2,000 Instagram followers, etc. And so where I tell people to start if you are entering the PR game is the podcast world. There are so many podcasts out there who are looking for guests, and they don't care about the amount of Instagram followers you have or your credibility. They care about your story and what you have to offer. And so starting in the podcasting world, getting yourself as a guest on podcasts is the number one way for you to enter into the PR space. Once you got some great podcasts under your belt and you've done about 10 or 20, then I would advance maybe to speaking opportunities or calling your local press and getting some more lower level tiered press opportunities. But if you want to build a reel, a Rolodex, a resume of exposure, starting with getting yourself as a guest on podcast is amazing. Lori, I will give your listeners 20% off our course. I created a whole course about getting yourself as a guest on podcasts.
Cool.
Is literally our entire proprietary formula for running a podcast tour, including how I write my pitches so they can run their own if they're not ready for a monthly retainer situation. We can do code business Lori.
Okay.
I'll send that to you for the show notes, but that's where you start. And that's the magical part about podcasting is it's not run by editors in chiefs who have very specific corporate standards. It's run by people wanting to talk to people. And so it's the most democratized way to get PR. And in my opinion, it is the most, it has the biggest return on investment. I've seen clients, one client after one podcast interview, which granted it took us 5 months to get her this big of a podcast, but she got over 100 inquiries of prospective clients wanting to work with her in 1 week. She got verified on Instagram. Another client's book got to a #1 Amazon bestseller the week of launch, and she gained 4,000 followers on Instagram due to this really concentrated podcast tour. One of our clients got an LA Times column, which is insane. One booked like a super high-end private one-on-one client retainer from one podcast. So it's so insane what comes from podcasting.
I can speak to that a little bit too. And I think it's so interesting that, I hear this all the time. I'm new. I don't have any experience. Like, who's going to want me to speak? And I said, that's just a story you're telling yourself.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
that's just a story. And I remember, and you said hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that you emailed. And I remember, doing the same thing with like my local news and even with podcasts, before I had a bit of a team, I would sit there and I had like a list and I would go through iTunes. Like, this was at the beginning, and I would just make a list, and then I would go and I would on Facebook and I would try and find the person. And even Facebook groups, like, pitching yourself feels confronting, because especially if you're in a place where you don't necessarily believe that what you're saying is of value, and at the same time, you're right, because it does have the way, first of all, you meet so many incredible people, like, that if you've had them on a guest or you've been a guest, you can then open up the conversation to build a relationship. Like, there's so many extras that nobody talks about when it comes to this, I want to call it like grassroots, but I don't even know that it is anymore. But, where you're not having to, get seen by an editor. You can just DM the person on Instagram.
Yeah. And I think that if you're afraid that you don't think that you have anything to say, the only way to combat that is to actually speak on a platform. That's the only way, because, if you think, well, in 5 years, I won't be afraid, you still will be. You will still think that you have nothing to say. The only way to combat that is to get in front of audiences and speak.
Yeah, I totally agree. So let's talk about doing this and like getting your brand out there and being super consistent. And maybe like, what are some of the tips that you can share on identifying like a story and how to, bring humanity into the conversation?
So I am actually going to outsource this advice. When it comes to building your brand narrative, I highly suggest the book Be by Jessica Zweig. She will get you dialed in on exactly what you have to say. And then once you know what you have to say, pick a platform that works for you. I have spent the last month, I'm launching my book, The Emotional Entrepreneur, and I have spent the last 2 months being like, I need a TikTok strategy. Like, TikTok is huge and it goes viral and and I don't work with TikTok. Like, it doesn't light me up, right? And so getting really, really clear on, are you better with your voice? Are you better with writing? Are you better with photos? Are you better with video? And then choose the lane that works best for you. You can try to hop on the trendy medium, the trendy outlet as many times as you want. If it's not aligned with you and it doesn't work with you, it's never going to happen. So when you're putting yourself out there, there's two folds, right? There's obviously the social media aspect, and having either a running Instagram or a blog or a podcast, having some sort of a content channel for people to engage with you every single day, which is really important. And then it's identifying what medium of PR do you want to reach new audiences? Is it hosting IG lives with other people? Is it being a guest on podcasts? Is it being quoted in articles? Is it contributing, being a contributor writing to platforms? So, there's so much available for us, and you don't have to do it all. You just have to do the ones that really, really jive with you.
Yeah. And I love that you said that, because what I was hearing is intention. I think a huge problem that we have now is there's so many options, and, the recommendation be, oh, you have to do all of the things, and it's super overwhelming. And I come back to it and I say, well, as an introvert, like, I don't want to do all of those things because that's exhausting to me. And I love that the recommendation you gave is to get intentional, to decide, what platforms feel inherently good, if that's even possible with social media, and to choose the medium. So for me, I'm the same as you. Like, I could sit at my computer with coffee all day, talk to 0 people, and just write. Like, that is my ideal life. Like, if I could talk to 0 people for days in a row and just eat food and drink coffee, I would be in heaven. So for me, email, long form, like scripting things, scripting podcasts, like that is my jam.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I also think like, oh, I need a TikTok strategy. And I'm like, that just feels exhausting to me. Like
Honestly, I have been fighting for a TikTok strategy for months now. And then, like, once a week, I'll get on and do one. And I feel super cringy and embarrassed afterwards because it's just not my highest self. And I think about all the time I could have directed that energy of just like one toe in, one toe out, trying,
yeah,
If I just eliminated that and stood tall in who I am and been like, TikTok doesn't really work for me, I could have redirected that focus to something that does. And that could have been growing expansively. Instead,
exactly.
I'm trying to fit into a box over here that's literally driving me nowhere.
Yeah. I fully agree. And I think, people say to me all the time, what should I do? They're asking me, I'm like, what do you like to do? What doesn't feel like you need to procrastinate on every single day? It
What do
maybe
you,
this
yeah,
video. Yeah, just do
like,
that.
mm-hmm,
Just do that.
that's key.
Like, just do that. If you want to sit and write all day, great, do that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
learn how to write then. Go learn how to write well so that, as you were saying, you're adding in humanity, you're adding in, the story. Go learn, go master the craft that lights you up so that you don't have to do TikTok if you don't want to.
And I think something that you've said so many times and in this interview and something that I do as well is the humanness to it. I think that people think being a thought leader or an influencer or a coach or a business owner or whatever it is on the internet has to have a certain trendiness to it or virality or whatever. What it really has to have is your heart. And so that doesn't mean you have to share everything, but it also means that you literally get to just be you. You get to talk the way you talk. You get to say the things you want to say. You get to be accumulation of all of your experiences and share those experiences without shame or worry. I think that it's the people who stand, and I know authentic is like an overused word, honestly, at this point, which fucking word isn't overused?
Yeah.
But literally, we'll call it aligned. If you are in alignment on the internet with PR interviews, on podcasts, on social media, on TikTok, on your blog, whatever it is, if you are so in alignment with you, it will translate.
It's so funny. I contracted to a PR agency a while ago, and they were having me do all of these things, and I was like, why? Like, I felt like a monkey at a carnival, where it was like, do the trick and we'll give you a peanut. Like, and it was just to get PR. And I was like, this has nothing to do with my ideal client. This has nothing to do with my business. And they just, wanted to be able to say that they got me PR. They wanted to be able to follow through. And I just went back to them and I was like, I know I have a contract. I'm just done, because this is not, I don't want to do this. This is exhausting for me. I'm not going to go talk about, running a virtual company. That's not what I do. Like, that's not, can I talk about it? Sure. I run a virtual company. Of course I can talk about it, but that's not what I do. Like, that's not for me. That doesn't light me up. That's not going to help me in any way. It's not going to help the people I want to reach in any way. And I think it comes back to the internet is saying all of these things that we have to do all of these things. And at the end of the day, if we can just come back to, what you were saying with your sister sitting in a room, eating chips, like, what feels like joy? Go and do that. Just go and do that.
Yeah, and really cut the fat on everything. My sister's big on video. She has a YouTube channel, she's on TikTok. And yeah, of course, I get that inkling of like, am I going to get left behind? Like, am I losing an opportunity to get exposure and to build a bigger audience? And I think that's just a really scarcity number-based mindset. There's so many people that have hundreds of thousands of followers and cannot monetize for the life of them off that community. And so it's better to have a very, very distinct, nourished, intimate, vulnerable connection with your community at a smaller scale than forcing yourself to be the monkey and just waiting for the peanut all the time, because you will burn out, people will see through it, and it won't work.
Yeah. I completely agree with you. And especially when you're doing it, on the flip side, to only monetize, at some point that's going to break too, because you're going to lose your momentum. You're going to lose the oomph. You're going to wake up one day and be like, I don't feel like it. And you know what? Like, it's not worth the money because I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah, everything for me, I have such an interesting relationship to money in the sense that when I started Scouts Agency, one of my main goals was just to make this financially viable. Like that was really one of my main goals. The flow of the daily work was meaningful to me because I believed in podcasts so significantly. And so I think there's such a beautiful balance for me specifically. I am very money driven, I am very revenue driven, etc. And I don't care what amount you offer me, I will not take it if it does not feed my soul. And so there are ways to be so aligned and love what you do and make a lot of money and turn down money because it's not going to be worth it for you in the end. And so I think that if you look at money as this, if I do what's aligned and if I do what's authentic and intimate and brings me joy, as you said, the money that I will receive because of that will feel so good.
Yes, 100%. And I think this is such a good conversation. I think people are so scared of that. I think people are so scared of saying no because of the money. I think of my journey over the last 10 years. I've been online for 10 years, and how many, let's call them revenue streams, successful, highly profitable revenue streams, I stopped doing because either they weren't in the best interest of the client, the client didn't know it, but I knew it, and therefore it was out of integrity to continue to run it, even though it made me a shit ton of money, right? Or I was like, you know what? I just don't want to fucking do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. This isn't good for me, for whatever reason. And I think as business owners, we feel so bad because, but the clients, they like it. Sure. But also at the end of the day, if I'm not 100% in, they're going to feel it anyway. And that's not giving them the best opportunity to be successful.
I always say that if you take a deal because of the number, it's going to chain you down from actually working on the thing that will bring you more money later on and make you feel good. So, for example, I really wanted to work on this one client. In the beginning, I took everything, right? You take everything, you're in the beginning, and then you're more secure. And then you have realized that that person who really nickel and dimed you and you gave the best offer to, you're actually working overtime for, because that's always how it fucking works. I've gotten to a point where I had a client, I really did want to work with them. They wanted to cut my retainer more than 50%. And I said no. And I think a year ago, I probably would have said yes, just out of this, like, I need to hit revenue, I need to pay my team, etc. So what would have happened if I had said yes to that? I would have been resentful that they weren't paying me enough. They would have been very demanding because they really did want to work with me and they were excited and I knew what the expectations were. And with that headache of being resentful of working on them so significantly, it actually makes me unavailable to find a client that is willing to pay maybe even above my retainer that I'm asking for. That feels really good to me. So every time we take money up front that isn't aligned, it's actually taking away better money from us later.
I feel like we need to end on that note, because isn't that the truth?
So true.
Right?
It takes, you got to stumble before you can realize that. You got to deal with the fucking terrible client. You got to deal with the worst sponsorship deal of your life. You got to go through it to get it. But once you get it, oh my God, it makes you unstoppable.
People say to me, they're like, can I do one-on-one coaching with you? No, like not for any amount of money right now. Like for real, like not even for $1 million. And like, I know people like, oh, you would do it for $1 million. I would not.
You and I are the same way. So at Scouts Agency, I know we're ending, but at Scouts Agency, we're at a point where I have a team who manages our clients day to day. If a client came to me and said, I want you to manage my account, I want you to pitch, I want you to do this, maybe $1 million, but like, we'll start there with the negotiation.
Yeah. We'll start there. Like, that's what I would change it. The starting negotiations for me to coach you one-on-one and do everything, manage you and do your tech and do all of these things and write your copy and would start at $1 million.
Yeah. Once you get to that point where you realize that, that's when your business scales.
And I think also too, and we're going to end here, but I want to drill this point home. This level of self-worth that we're talking about right now did not happen overnight. It's not from yesterday. We didn't just start. I just want to make that clear, because if you're like, wow, that's pretty ballsy that you would say that you would like, your fee is $1 million. Yeah, my fee is $1 million, because I know how much money I can make you.
Yeah. And
Right?
first of all, that level of worthiness comes from experience. Like
Yeah.
it comes from, I started my retainers at $500 a month.
I used to charge $97 an hour.
Yeah. Nothing.
Yeah. Nothing.
And I started that because I said, okay, one, I have no experience because I had no experience. Let me see what I can do. And then I was like, holy shit, I can like really fucking deliver here.
Yeah.
And sometimes it takes our subconscious a little bit. Some people can go from charging 1,000 to 5,000 right off the bat. For me, I felt safer incrementally increasing
Same.
and increasing and increasing. And that's how you build that worth.
Yep. 100%. I did the exact same thing, to the point where I remember having an argument with my now ex-husband, we're happily divorced, about him saying, you need to raise your rates. And I'm like, I can't. And he's like,
oh my God.
Why? I'm like, I just can't do it yet. And it's funny because now we talk about, the fees to enroll in our programs where you don't even get one-to-one access to me. And it's a joke. And I was like, I couldn't psychologically, I couldn't get there. And so, it's always like charge a fee and do whatever you need to do. You'll get there. You'll get to the place where you're resentful. You'll get to the place where you're super annoyed. And the only way to get out of that is to charge more.
It's so true. I laugh looking back a year and a half ago. I was making a certain amount of revenue every month for Scout's agency. And I called my friend and I said, I don't understand how I scale this, because if I bring on more clients, I have to have more team members, and that just doesn't make sense. And he says, you have to raise your rates. And I said, no one's going to pay more for this. I say that every time before I raise my rates. And every time I raise my rates, they all pay it. Every time.
Every time.
Mm-hmm.
Every time. So moral of the story is raise your damn rates.
Yes.
And also put yourself out there.
Yes. Put yourself out there. Find the medium that works for you. Be an introvert on the internet and raise your rates.
And raise your rates. Amazing. Where can people go to find you?
You can find me on Instagram at Scout Sobel. There you can find everything. I have links to Scout's agency, OK Sis podcast, Scout podcast, my book. DMs are always open. I love chatting about this. So come say hi.
Amazing. And we will put the link to your podcast program with the discount code in the show notes. So Beautiful. Thank you everybody so much for listening, and we will talk to you soon. Bye.